The discovery of a zombified bird leads to a worldwide apocalypse. Will she be able to escape and save her children, or will she be struck down by the global pandemic? Hi, my name is Shar, and this is the And Other Stories podcast, where I tell stories of the supernatural and criminal, both real and fictional. Works of fiction written by me. Sick bird. It started with a walk to school. A group of kids was crowded around something at the school gates. As we approached, they all let out a squeal and stepped back. It was a dead pigeon, sitting up, its head missing. I stepped closer to figure out why it was still standing, when it moved. What I had thought was a bloody stump at its neck was actually a head, flopped back, looking straight up at the sky. But it was completely stripped of feathers, red and raw. I jumped back with a scream, and my 6-year-old started to cry, and then ran. I ran after her, shouting her name. I tried to calm her by saying it's fine, I just got a fright, and it's only a sick bird, a very, very sick bird. Presumably a janitor or someone will come along soon enough and put it out of its misery, swiftly. She had calmed by the time school started. She walked in quiet and sad, but I knew she'd be fine. I walked back a different route. The morning was busy, right up until I got the phone call. Another parent called me frantically. Something was happening at the school. We needed to get there fast. She didn't have any other information. I was in the car when I got another call from my dad. He'd heard something was happening at the school. The kids were all running out, and my terror threatened to make me throw up. When I got there, I couldn't get the car through. Vehicles were parked all over the road, doors flung open and left. I saw parents leading their crying children quickly to their cars, running, dragging them by the hand. I darted through the crowd to the playground, my eyes searching for little blonde heads, and I saw them, huddled with a friend and her mum. They ran at me sobbing with great heaves as I ran to them. I struggled to the other mum with my daughters clinging to me in fear and asked her what had happened. All she had heard was the teachers were ill. They all started dropping right where they stood. All of them. So the kids started running. Some of them called their parents with their phones and the riot started. I had just started to theorise a gas leak, staring at the children's faces one by one to check if they were all right, when I heard a scream from near the front doors to the school. A child held the hand of a parent who had fallen to the ground. Others rushed to help, but then another dropped to the left of me, just as if they'd been hit straight on the head. I turned to my friend. She was staring at me glassy-eyed, swaying slightly. And in the 2 seconds I watched her, a red rash crawled up from her neck and onto her face, before she too crumpled to the floor. The whole crowd started to panic. I had to grab the hands of my daughters as the surge of people hit us, and we were forced toward the gates. My youngest stumbled on something, and I instinctively pulled her hand up to steady her, as I saw she had tripped on another body on the floor. The ambulances were arriving and trying to carve a path through the people as we reached the car and drove off. My one hand on the steering wheel, the other reaching for my phone to call my husband Jamie. He answered before the first full ring, said he'd been trying to call me. He was on his way. A major incident at the girls' school had been announced on the news. I didn't know what to tell him, other than we were all safe. I was too horrified to describe it. It was only a few minutes to home. We clung to each other there. I dared not turn on the television. I didn't want the girls to see it. The images were already burned into my brain. Jamie arrived home and immediately ran to us, and we stayed like that, together, for several minutes. The girls had mostly stopped crying, but didn't want me to go anywhere. I assured them I would just be in the next room, and put on Pocahontas before going into the kitchen with Jamie. He said it was on every news channel. They didn't know what it was, but it was spreading quickly. After we got the girls to bed, we turned on the news. The hospitals were overwhelmed already. Doctors were falling ill. Staff were abandoning patients in their fear. The city had already shut down. Everyone had been told to go home and stay there. We heard a sound outside and looked out to see the neighbours getting in their car and driving off. We watched the news for the rest of the night. I drifted off sometime in the early hours. I woke to the girls sleeping right next to me on either side. The TV still flickered, and Jamie watched it intently with a cup of coffee in his hand. He saw I was awake and immediately told me it was spreading everywhere. A nationwide curfew had been put in place. Businesses were all shut down. The news was only still broadcasting because they hadn't left the building. The same presenter sat there in a crumpled shirt, tie abandoned, and buttons undone at the top. He spoke in disbelief as he described the situation in different cities. Mobile phone videos were played in the corner of the screen of people dropping to the floor, the red rash covering their faces. But then there were newer videos. They showed people with the rash, but they were standing, still and swaying. They don't react to the person pointing the camera. He shouts at them, clicks his fingers, waves his hand in front of their faces, and they do nothing. A different video is from London Bridge. From a distance, the camera is pointed at a group of them, angry red rash covering their heads. But they either stand still or shuffle slowly together, gathering. Videos of helicopters crashing, burning buildings, army squads guiding running people, abandoned hospitals, all flashed on the screen. Jamie asked me if I felt okay, and I assured him I was fine, and I searched his neck for any sign of a rash. There was none. Reports started to come in about the nature of the disease. Doctors would talk on the news over phone call that they thought the people were still aware. They knew what was happening, but they were locked in there. Unable to communicate, unable to feel, unable to experience emotion. But he would not answer the question about if they could still feel pain. All we could do at that time was wait. The instructions were stay in your home. So we stayed for several days. More reports came in, more videos. These ones were different. The afflicted who had started to group up had started to act together. It started off as roaming, walking slowly from place to place, but they started to tear at things. Lights were brought down, car windows were smashed. Then they started to go for people. A video showed a man live streaming, shouting at them from a distance, begging them to speak. Do they remember? He asked them what they were doing. Where did they live? They started walking toward him, shuffling at first, and then starting to run. The camera went blurry as the man filming started to run too, and the video cut off with a scream. The phones went first. I suddenly noticed there were no more bars in the corner, not of signal, not of Wi-Fi. Jamie's was the same. It was the television next. The news was the only channel running, but the presenter had to eventually sign off. The studio was dark, and the picture flickered as he urged us to stay safe and, if we can, to get far away from the cities before the picture went black. It had been completely quiet in our neighbourhood. We were quite far from the city centre, but too close now. We had stayed hoping things would get better, but we had stayed too long. That was when we had packed up the car and planned to go to my in-laws in the Highlands. Their house was isolated, far from anyone, and it was only a few hours' trip. But when we got there, we had found them, lying in their bed. My mother-in-law with an angry red rash up one side of her face, a bullet hole in her forehead. My father-in-law, one hand holding his wife's, the other hand holding a gun in his mouth. Thankfully, the children were still in the car, and we could keep them away from the bedroom while we stayed that night, saying Grandma and Grandpa had gone away on holiday. But we had nowhere else to stay. I comforted Jamie as best I could, but he was stoic, and we went to bed with few words between us. However, in the middle of the night, I was awoken by a scratching. Jamie was itching his neck, and the scratches sounded dry and painful. He wouldn't stop, so I switched on the light, and he blinked at me wondering what I was doing, as I stared at the rash climbing up his throat and onto his face. He looked at me quizzically, before his eyes became unfocused and glazed. His hand dropped from his neck and hung limp. He fell back onto the pillow. I ran from the room and grabbed my children. It comes to me now, the pain of running from him. But I had to take them and run. I had to. I hope he would have done the same thing. But still, at night, when the children sleep, I lie awake thinking of him locked in that body, still aware, still thinking of us. Does he remember? Is he still there? I ran to the only place I could think of. There was an old abandoned house about an hour up the road that we would drive past on outings with my in-laws. It was covered in graffiti, and yet it was in the middle of a valley, in the middle of nowhere, with no roads that led to it that you could go in a car. It always fascinated me. The children stay clinging to me as we hide together in the dark. I'll have to leave them soon. I need to go and find some more food, maybe even find some help. I also think that I might get ill soon, that they might be alone. If anyone finds this note, If anyone finds them, please take care of them. Tell them I love them. Thank you for listening. I hope you liked it. My name is Shar, and this is the And Other Stories podcast. See you next time.